Hi, this is David Coyle, and thank you for joining me again for another segment for Real Life Worth Living. Today we're going to begin a new series as we look at Matthew chapter 5, part of the Sermon on the Mount, at the Beatitudes, or as I like to call them, Jesus' basic attitudes for Christian living. Now that's quite a mouthful, so we'll just call them the Beatitudes. I probably won't get any farther today than some introductory comments, but I want us to see in the verses that generally get skipped over, the first two verses, first two or three verses actually, well the first two verses, because verse 3 begins with the first of the Beatitudes. There are 9 places, that's not 9, that's 5, but there are 9 places where we find the verse or a verse containing, usually starting with the word blessed. Now that's an important word, and it is a very important concept in the life of the Christian, and we do want to look at it in detail, or in more detail than we're going to look at it today. But as we begin, I would like to read for you what I am using for a text containing all of the Beatitudes, which is verses 1 through 12. And then I basically want to look at verses 1 and 2 in this session. And seeing the multitudes, he went up into a mountain, and when he was set, the disciples came unto him. And he opened his mouth, and he taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely, for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. Now, in these verses, as I said, these are Jesus' basic attitudes for life, and he's laying out God's structure for blessing in the life of a believer. These are not for the unbeliever. And as we are going to see in the next several sessions, these are not 9 different people who are being addressed here, but they are every single solitary Christian who are supposed to, all of us together and each of us individually, display these particular attributes of the Christian life living within us in order that we might please God, in order that we might receive the blessing of God. We're getting ahead of ourselves. I want us to look at the first 2 verses, as I said. The first thing we notice is that Jesus looked out and saw the multitudes. I want to point something out here, very basic, probably more instructional than you hoped for at this point, but I wanted to just point out one thing. Notice the word multitudes, plural. Jesus looked out and saw the multitudes. You know, he never went from place to place that he didn't draw crowds. Not a crowd, but crowds from every direction. He didn't travel silently. People always noised abroad when Jesus was moving from place to place. It was quite a spectacle in the countryside around Israel at that time. And every time he moved from one vicinity to the next, from one location to the next, from one house to the next, there was always a crowd of people, or a number of crowds of people following or coming to the place where he was, down every road in the community to seek him out, to hear his words, to see the miracles, to hear the words of life, to hear something that would change their lives, to see something that would change their lives. Some, of course, came out of curiosity. Most came because of what they heard, seeking something material, something transforming in their lives. And of course, we know that Jesus is the living expression of God, come to earth in order to demonstrate God, the will of God, the Word of God, the life of God among individuals, that he might draw us into the family of God, each and every one of us who will hear him and believe his word. Now, he looked out and saw multitudes coming. And he went into a mountain that is up a big hillside, the Mount of Olives. And as he came up to the Mount of Olives, he sat down. Now, that was the rabbinic custom of the time, to sit down in this particular place on the hillside where the people could gather around the hillside and be able to hear him as he spoke. That was important for them because they needed to hear what he had to say. Jesus picked a spot, the Mount of Olives, which is a natural amphitheater. Beautiful place. And it was a place where the people, as they gathered, would have absolutely no difficulty whatsoever hearing every word, every enunciation that Jesus made. His disciples, it says, came to him. Now, not necessarily only the 12. There were other people who had heard him in other places and who believed. There were those who believed because of the news that they heard about Jesus, never having seen him, never having known him, never having heard him, but they believed anyway based upon the reputation that Jesus had already built up in the communities about. His disciples came to him, at least the 12, probably a lot more than that. And as his disciples came to him, then the other people around who had come from every location, they came and joined the group in order that they might hear. You know, it's an interesting concept. A crowd draws a crowd. When I was in Bible college and at other special times when I pastored churches, we used to go out and hold open air meetings in various locations throughout Washington, D.C. I did it in North Carolina. We did it in other places as well. And we always took a group of people with us who would stand around and pay attention to what we were doing, because a crowd draws a crowd. And that's the same thing that we see here. His disciples came and stood with him. The crowds came. They listened, and he began to teach them. Now notice too, they came to be taught by this very famous rabbi. They didn't come to be seen. We could learn that lesson in a lot of our churches today, couldn't we? They did not come to be seen. They didn't come to show off themselves, their clothes, their ride. They came to hear and to see what God wanted to tell them through this rabbi. They came not to be heard or to argue, but to hear the words of life spoken by this one who came forth from God. Even the Pharisees had to testify, "Thou art come from God." Even they couldn't deny the godly message that he came and proclaimed. They didn't come to dominate the situation, but to be dominated by the words of the living Son of God. And he opened his mouth and he taught them the Word of God. He interpreted the Word literally, not traditionally. He spoke not as the Pharisees and the Sadducees or any other of the priests and scribes, but he spoke in a way that was so unfamiliar to them that he magnetized them. He drew them to him, and they hung on every word. His disciples, that is, would have hung on every word he said, knowing them to be the words of life and the word of truth. His detractors, and there were plenty of those in every situation, came in order that they might hear him to trip him up. The curious were looking for alternatives to what they heard on a daily basis, and the seekers were looking for someone, were looking for something to trust, for someone to believe. He knew and he knows who is serious and who is not. He knew some only came for a spectacle, and he knew who they were.